Hello, welcome to my video, and in this video I'm going to cover the game between Nodirbek Abdusattorov and Nepomniachtchi from the playoff of World Rapid. It was the game 2. In the first round it was a draw, and now Abdusattorov had white pieces. Don't you f***ing dare to skip this. He played c4. He played it against Fabiano Caruana. He played against Magnus. He won this. You can check it out in the description. Also, he played against Wojtaszek in previous rounds, and he also beat him, so why to change something that's really good? Nepomniachtchi answered the same, and we have 4 knights English, after which Abdusattorov played e4, like in a few games before this one. The point of e4 here is to just stop d5 from black, to control the d5 square much better. The setback of this move is that it weakens the d4 square. Black plays bishop b4 here, trying to use the fact that the e4 pawn is slightly more exposed. So that's why he plays d3, to discourage some exchanges and capturing on e4. Now black plays d6, and now h3. Against Carlsen he didn't play h3, and he allowed bishop g4, weakening the d4 additionally. So he chose this to stop bishop g4 and to make the d4 square much more secured. Now black plays a5. The point of a5 is to get some space for the bishop, because after a3 he can go to c5, and knight a4 doesn't do that much because the bishop has a7 and bishop is quite safe there. In case of not playing a5, let's say he just castles in this position, now white has a3, and after, let's say this, to go knight a4, and the bishop pair will be lost. Nepo chose to go for a5, trying to preserve his bishop. Now bishop e2 and bishop c5 back, bringing back his bishop to a better diagonal. Also now this a5 move is useful because there's no a3 b4. White has to prepare this with plenty of moves. Now white castles h6 to stop bishop g5, the same idea. Bishop e3 tries to exchange bishops and eventually to open up the f-file, which could result in some initiative on the f-file. Black takes on e3, takes and castles. White would like to play knight h4, but there is one problem. The knight on h4 is not defended. And black has a nice tactic here. He can take on e4, and the knight on h4 hangs on the next move. White first plays queen e1 to protect h4 square, and after knight e7, okay, now it doesn't matter, but anyways white would play knight h4. And now black tries to exchange these knights. Knight f5 now, because I believe that after capturing on g6 this would not be a great challenge for black, even though it's 3 versus 2 on the king side with double pawns. Also, white has double pawns in the center. It's not really a big problem for black. So he went for knight f5, more ambitious. Now in case of bishop takes f5, white had in mind rook takes f5. But first black plays c6, queen g3. Now white wants to just double on the f-file and put some pressure on the knight on f6. Black took on f5, rook takes, and now knight h7, trying to free his queen and to get to h4. White continues with rook af1, doubling on the f-file, and now queen h4. Black is hoping that he would exchange queens, but white is just accepting this, and he plays king h2. It was better just to go queen h2, to try to kick this queen away after with g3. And after knight g5, he would probably play bishop g4 and next g3. Okay, he plays king h2, black took, knight e7, and he went back to f2. The problems begin because black played knight g5. If he played knight f6, he would not have any problems, because the bishop would not be active in that case. Potentially even just push for d5, let's say rook a d8 and start pushing d5. Everything is covered, there's no danger of getting rook f5 next. Black would be fine in this position. But instead he went for knight g5, trying to reroute his knight to e6 and c5 probably, but the problem is that after this, knight e6, bishop g4 is quite strong. Nepo went with knight c7, because after knight c5 there is d4. This is a really nasty position. If you go to d3, then there's rook d2, and if knight b4, then you take, and rook gets to the 7th rank, which is quite unpleasant for black. And also, after bishop g4, you cannot play a random move like rook a d8 because there is rook f7. And after rook takes, then bishop e6. And it's just a pawn up for white. He went to c7, and now knight a4. Really nice move, getting to b6 on the next move. The threat was to just go, let's say I make a random move like g6, then white has knight b6, and let's say if rook d8, then knight d7. And if you move the rook, then there you have this move, rook takes f7. Unless you have something like knight f5, that's maybe something that I missed, knight f5, but even then I think the position is pretty awful. Maybe you can even take king f7, take on g6, king g6, and just rook f6 and h5. Maybe even that's just enough. And next rook g6, knight f6. But after this you don't have to do that. You can play probably just rook f6. It's still a very, very bad position. To avoid all this, he plays f6. And now white chose to push in the center for d4. Rook fd8. Now black tries to anticipate capturing on e5 by just capturing back with the d-pawn and at least controlling the d-file. But now white does the same. He puts the rook on the d-file, and now it's already unpleasant because if you just get your king closer, then black loses the control over d-file. You cannot simply go king e8 because of bishop d7 and you'll eventually surrender the file. It's not a very pleasant situation. You see that black's pieces don't have much space in this case. So he tried to open up the position somehow on the queen side by b5. White took, and now he took with the knight. And this was the moment for white to just capture on e5, capture back and go rook fd1, take over the d-file, after which, let's say, black takes, king f7 and knight c5. Looks very good for white because black's knights are totally useless. These double pawns on the e-file are really strong now. They don't allow white knights to enter the position. The e4 pawn covers d5 and f5. The pawn on e3 covers d4, so knights are totally useless. And this position looks really, really unpleasant to play. But here white chose to play rook c1. And black had a chance to stabilize by playing ed, and rook a b8. Now the difference is that the position is not opened, only the c-file is open, but knight on e7 does a pretty good job of defending the c6. When you compare this position with this one, you can see that black is doing much better because there are no targets, there are no entry squares like in the previous position. Here he chose to play rook a b8, knight c3. And again, I think it was time to play ed4 to try to equalize somehow. He went for this, h5, and now black took on c3, rook c3, and now rook b5, bishop e2. Now the bishop did its job on the h3 c8 diagonal. He went back to e2, and now rook b6. Bishop c4. Now if the king goes to e8, then you have de. You cannot capture with the d pawn because of bishop f7 and losing the rook. So if you take with the f pawn, then there is rook f2, but even then I think d5 should be okay. After bishop c4, he went for d5. Takes, and now there is this unpleasant double pin. The first layer is on the d-file, the rook on d8 is pinned, and the second layer is that the king on f7 is pinned. So after this e4, the pawn on d5 is pinned. I think that black cannot avoid losing the pawn here. He just went king f6. And now white took on d5, knight takes ed, and he went for king g5. Tries to get active in the endgame, trying to collect the h5 pawn, but now white plays rook e3, counter-attacking the pawn on e5. He took on h5, rook e5, and king g6. Now the main issue of black in this position is this d pawn, which could be far advanced, and that's exactly what white does, and uses the fact that the a5 pawn is under attack now. So now Nepo plays a4, because if you capture on d6, then white is happy to exchange and to get two passed pawns on the queen side. So correctly Nepo chose to play a4, and now d7, time to push this pawn even further. king f7, and now rook f2. King g6, and now rook e7, preparing to get both rooks on the 7th rank. Rook d6, and now rook ff7. Now black gives one check, but there is king f4, rook b8, trying to get some counterplay via rook b4. Now rook g7, and here Nepo makes a huge mistake. King f6 was more resilient, but still pretty hopeless. But he went for king h5 here. You can pause the video to find the checkmate. What was the quickest way to finish the game? In the game, king f5 was played by Abdusattorov. And write me in the comment section what do you think was the best way to finish the game. Black took on b2, and now rook g8. Again, white had a winning move in this position, but let me know in the comment section. Now rook bd2, targeting the d7 pawn, and again, white missed the opportunity to win. He went for rook e1, trying to get rook h1 checkmate. Now black goes rook d5, and now the position is a draw. But still, it's a very tricky position, and they had a couple of more checks, and this was the key moment. And now black could have gone rook from d2 to d4. If king e3, then one more check, and the only way to escape is to go somehow to f1 or to g3. If he goes to f2 and goes to g3, there is rook g5, exchanging rooks. And after this, rook e7, rook d3. Black's king gets too much activity, and it's enough for a draw. The other way to go is to go towards f2 and g1. If you give a check, let's say king f2, rook d2, king f1, and now black has rook d1. Again, exchanging one pair of rooks, leaving this d7 pawn quite vulnerable. This is enough activity to get the draw. But it's important to lure the king to the first rank, because if you don't do it, then let's say this. If you capture on d7 immediately, there's always some checkmate like rook h1 and g4. So the point is that you first get the king to the first rank, and then you can exchange rooks or capture the pawn on d7, whatever you like. But instead, he went for rook from 5 to d4, and now the problem is that after king g3, rook d3, he goes to h2. Because now you don't have this option of rook g5 check to exchange rooks. That was the whole point, because in the previous line, if he went to g3, black had the rook on the 5th rank and had the chance to go rook g5. But now he doesn't, and now it's all over, because after rook d5, this doesn't work because of rook e5 and g3. He went for rook d5, and after queening, here rook e5, we have the same position, and black is losing the rook in the end. And in this position, Nepomniachtchi resigned, and this meant that Abdusattorov became a rapid world champion. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section. I will answer to you, and that's it. Have a good day, and Happy New Year. Bye.